Nice to be here and try this out again. It's been a while, but this weekend is the 4th of July, and this is something we wanted to celebrate today, so I'm going to talk about some things about the United States because it's kind of a unique country. We believe that the biblical prophecy points out some activities and some functions of the United States that will lead to the end of this world. And there are lots of signs that we are living at the end of time. But I want to talk about one this morning that has to do with liberty. This is the 249th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. 1776 was the year the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration, and that officially separated us from British rule. The subject of freedom was central to the thinking of this new nation. And it was more than political freedom from Great Britain. This was a turning point in the history of the world. And there's some interesting books written about it, but there were maybe 6 or 8 points in history that they say there were major changes that took place in the direction the world was moving. And in the West, when I mean the West, I mean Europe and eventually the United States, it was moving from an old order of kings and nobles to a, in that system, the peasants existed to support the nobles. They weren't important, but the rulers are important, and that's why the people were there. But it was moving from that to a democratic system or idea where the citizens not only had freedom, but they participated in the government and they had rights. This was not unique to the United States. It was a change in history, and the French Revolution was a major turning point. In the old order, the church and state worked together to control both behavior and conscience. They told you how to live, and they told you what to think. And if you got out of line, they had special treatments. So these ideas led to the French Revolution, and everything just blew apart. The whole old order was replaced by secular and democratic governments. And the church is more or less on their own. And eventually, most governments did not support the churches anymore, and this was one of the things that changed. Now, along with that, the United States came along and put some of these ideas into practice. Prior to that, they were ideas. But the United States put it all to a test and developed into what I think is the greatest country on earth, maybe in history. It is incredible what this nation became. I mean, even today, we, I think, are the undisputed leaders of the world. We have an economy with an annual GDP of $31 trillion. The next in line is China with $19 trillion, and then Germany with $4.5 trillion. Those are big differences. I mean, we hear about it all the time, but trillion's still a big number. And but anyway, another thing, and I think this is what made you could list a number of things that made this a great nation. I mean, it was a new world. It was undeveloped. There's all kinds of resources, but there are other places in the world with resources. There was the idea that we called religious liberty. The country was founded by people largely who were fleeing the oppression in the old world. And they came here to find a place where they could freely worship as dictated by their conscience. There were Quakers, Baptists, Anabaptists, Congregationalists. They wanted a country where the government didn't control their beliefs, try to rule their religious behavior. Now, our founding fathers believed that our rights came from God, and no government can take those away. They considered religious liberty the first of all the rest of our freedoms. Freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of religion are pretty similar concepts, or very, very closely related. Now, this isn't the first time in history it came along, but there were reasons why that developed the way it did, because in the old world, to get rid of the old church-state system that has always existed, but certainly in Europe in medieval times, they paid an enormous sacrifice for our freedoms. Get Wiley's History of the Reformation and see what happened. Millions of people were literally died at the stake. The story is incredible that people put God, first. I mean, I think we do too, but it was really put to the test. They would not yield their faith for anything. And that story was one of the most incredible achievements in human history. It was really awesome, and when you read it, it is an amazing story. But that's what our freedom cost. So when they came here, they didn't want that whole system repeated. Their sacrifice laid down the foundation for the whole concept of liberty. Now, we think it's normal. We think this is the way life is and how it's always been. And it was never like this. It's not like this in most of the world today. But so the first time in history, the principles of freedom were actually enshrined in a constitution. Freedom of thought opened the way for free inquiry, investigation. That led to discovery, and a whole free economy grew out of it. And we have amazing prosperity. So life is like it is in this country largely to this one major founding concept, religious freedom. It was clearly stated in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these rights, in other words, were not based on human generosity, because humans aren't. Because there are people who would enslave all of us if they could. And I don't know why people like that often end up in control of things. But compared to the rest of the world, we have it pretty good. We have the necessities of life, and we can get into our vehicles, our cars, our trucks, our campers, motorcycles, jeeps, expensive bicycle, boats, and pretty much go wherever we want. And the government doesn't pay too much attention. I mean, they're watching, but they haven't done a whole lot about it yet. So the first settlers came to this shore were very religious people. Religion is a high priority. In the past, heretics, people deemed heretics, were punished, and they wanted freedom. You take away that freedom, and it's in jeopardy, by the way, and all of our other freedoms and our prosperity will follow suit. If you compare the United States to the other nations in the Americas, North and South America, which were all settled in the same centuries, and you compare the differences, why did the United States move out so far ahead? It wasn't that they lacked intelligence, or they weren't hardworking, or that they didn't have resources. They were still under the old order of church-state system that ruled Europe. And it always ends up in degradation. People are afraid to think for themselves. They fear the people who do. And we need to remember the cost of freedom. Now, similar issues existed in biblical times. In the 6th century BC, when the Jews were captive in Babylon, they were subject to state control. It was demonstrated when Nebuchadnezzar built a golden image on the plain of Dura, and he gathered all the leaders of the kingdom and commanded them to bow down to the image he had constructed. And you know the story. It's probably the best known story in the Bible, or at least among them. 3 Hebrews refused to bow down. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, apparently could not believe that anyone would stand up to him, because he had the power to burn them alive. And he said to them in Daniel 3:13, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image I have set up?" It was incredible to him, so he actually gave them a second chance. And he made certain they understood the consequences of what was going to happen here. And I don't know, put yourself in their shoes. It might be hard to do, but he told them, says, if you are ready, you know, when the band plays, you will fall down and worship the image that I have made. But if you will not worship this image, you shall be cast immediately into a burning fiery furnace. And, excuse me, and who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? And their answer was still an amazing thing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that be the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." That's, to me, one of the most amazing statements in the Bible. Millions of people have made that choice. The key phrase, "but if not," regardless of the consequences, meant they would not serve the Babylonian kings, gods. And unfortunately, people often sell their faith for a whole lot less than that. You know, pleasure, convenience, popularity, recreation, jobs. That's usually all it takes. This is one of the best known stories in the Bible. I don't know if you've heard the story, but back in World War II, the Battle of Dunkirk, the Germans were driving the Allied armies into the sea. They were facing complete annihilation. These were the armies of Britain primarily, and if they were destroyed, they would not have an army. And during that situation, everybody in England is on pins and needles. What is going to happen down here? I mean, we'll be destroyed if that army's wiped out. And a British naval officer radioed 3 words, "but if not." The British people knew what that meant. I mean, there was more of a Christian, biblical society than ours. Today, I don't think it would mean anything, but the people understood the message, and they knew it was an announcement. We are not going to surrender, even if we are destroyed, was the message. Well, that galvanized the British nation. And of course, you've read about how they rescued the troops from the beaches and they had all these boats go down there, small boats, and pick them up. I mean, this wasn't just the British Army. These were their sons. The 3 Hebrews in Babylon demonstrated the cost of freedom. But if not, let it be known to you. You know, you don't talk to royalty like this. I mean, people had good reasons to respect the king. He had power, and he would exercise it. But let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image you have set up. That's the cost of freedom. That cost has been paid by a lot of people. You know, it would have been easy for them to feign compliance. They could have bowed down and tied their sandal or something. But they stood up publicly, would not kneel, and refused to even appear to worship an idol. Now, this is a biblical concept. Jesus referred to it. He said in Luke 9:24, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. Now, people, a lot of them think that our liberties are the result of the Enlightenment that took place in Europe, but people didn't die for intellectual freedom. When Galileo said the earth wasn't the center of the universe, he knew it was true, but he wasn't willing to sacrifice his life for it. But people gave their lives for their religious convictions, and to them we owe our freedom. Now, the issue today hasn't been gained for us, and just to enjoy. Are we willing to pay the cost? There is a price to pay for anyone who would be a Christian. There are people around the world who continue to pay the ultimate sacrifice for their faith. And their hardships are a whole lot more than a loss of a job or divorce or rejection by the family. Some of us were in the military and we were threatened with court-martial, but at some point, your faith will cost you something. It will cost you a lot. At some point in your life, you will choose whether you will worship an idol for some reason or whether you will remain faithful to Christ. We know that before the end of time, the ultimate test is going to be required. The Bible teaches this in Revelation 13:14 about issues that are going to be developed before the end of time that are going to separate the sheep from the goats. Most of you are familiar with that. I want to read some of these verses just to refresh your minds. In Revelation 13:11, I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke as a dragon. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast. And it goes on and says that he performed signs in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound by the sword and came to life. And it was given him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause as many as would not worship the beast and the image to be killed. So religious persecution was about. You're either going to accept the official system or you are going to be subject to oppression. This is the final issue in Earth's history, and it will separate God's people from everyone else. And we have known a long time it's coming. There have been a lot of speculation about what it will look like, and of course we'll all be wrong. But it will happen. And there will be a conflict between those who keep God's law and those who will not. In Revelation 14:12, it says, "Here are those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus." And there's going to be an issue in the law, God's law, that are going to separate everything out. The only issue between God's law and man's, obviously, is the Sabbath. If you read the Ten Commandments, it's absolutely clear what it says. There's no reason to be confused, and the Bible doesn't. Some people think the early church changed it. Well, they did, but it depends on how early you're looking at. The history of the early church is essentially the book of Acts. And the book of Acts gives more attention to the Sabbath than any other part of the Bible. If you don't believe me, get it out and read it. It wasn't until the 2nd century that actually some things started creeping in that changed things. And so in any case, there are indications, even in our nation, that the tide is changing. What I'm going to talk about may at first sound like I'm supporting a political party, but this is not a partisan sermon. And whatever you think politically is up to you. I don't care. But things are happening. We have our political views. I think the church ought to stay out of it. But and you have to keep in mind that our national leaders probably aren't as familiar with biblical prophecies as we are. And There are interesting things happen. On February 6, for example, by executive order, the president appointed a task force for the prevention of anti-Christian bias. Have you read about that? It's made up of almost all the heads of departments of the government. You can get online and read about it. And it says, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, to assist faith-based entities, community organizations, houses of worship in their efforts to strengthen American families, promote work and self-sufficiency, and protect religious liberty. It sounds great, doesn't it? It is hereby ordered. The executive branch wants faith-based entities, community organizations, and houses of worship to the fullest extent permitted by the law to compete on a level playing field for grants, contracts, programs, and other federal funding opportunities. The government welcomes opportunities to partner with such organizations through innovative and measurable and outcome-driven initiative. So they're planning to get involved and help finance church activities. Well, you might ask, well, which ones? Are all churches going to be treated the same? Is there really a level playing field? Will they support some more than others? This is going to open up a can of worms. I ran into that when I was in Cleveland. This is 18 years ago. This is a long time before this. Actually, it was under Obama, who did the same thing. But I just want to let you know I'm not involved in partisan politics here. But I had a house, and I was putting a security system in it, and a technician came over, and he was in the basement stringing wires, and he was agitated as he could be. And I said, something wrong? I mean, it was just so obvious. And he said, yeah, I just quit my job, and I got this new one. I said, well, what was your job? And he said, well, I was the liaison between the government and the churches in the city of Cleveland to appropriate different funds to their activities. And he said, they were building churches with these funds. He said, not all churches. Some of them were, he said it was nothing fair about it. He said it got so corrupt, and I got more and more upset. And he said, I finally just quit. And that's what's going to happen. Anyway, by presidential executive order, the president has established a White House Office of Faith-Based Initiative. That was under Obama. And some people think that would be a good thing because this would become a Christian nation. Well, it wouldn't become a Christian nation. It never was a Christian nation. Our forefathers were influenced by Christian ideas, but they weren't all Christian. That's a personal choice. Anyway, there's a lot of issues involved in this decree. He said, is the government going to define what Christian means? Will it include everybody who calls themselves Christian? Will they have a list of beliefs that you must accept before you are a Christian? And who's going to make up that list? And the interesting part is the whole title of it, the Task Force for the Prevention of Anti-Christian Bias. Does that mean those of us who are biased against some churches are guilty of breaking this law? We say all kinds of things about what's going to happen in the religious world. Is this task force also concerned about with non-Christian religions? Are we going to single out Christians as opposed to all the other religions in this country? Is the government getting involved in deciding things they should stay out of? In fact, the groups behind this idea are Christian nationalists. Have you read about that? Do you know what the NAR is? The New Apostolic Reformation? The Southern Poverty Law Center is just a group of lawyers who give aid to people who need legal help. Anyway, they characterize the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation, as the greatest threat to American democracy that most people have never heard of. You ought to look it up, see who's leading this group and where they are. They want one of their goals is to bring about Christian dominion over all aspects of society and end or weaken the separation of church and state. Advocates of Christian nationalism consider their view of Christianity to be an integral part of this nation's identity, and they want the government to promote or even enforce the religion's position within it. They managed to establish what is called the White House Faith Office. You can look that one up too, see what they're doing. It's being led by Paula White, one of the leaders in the NAR, and the spiritual advisor to the president. If you want to know what that means, look her up and listen to a sermon. You will be very impressed. They are guided by what is called the Seven Mountain Mandate. Have you ever heard of that? There are books being written about this. Things are changing. We are in another turning point. And these have national influence. They plan to, this Seven Mountain Mandate is a strategy for evangelizing the modern world through governmental power. And they plan to transform these 7 spheres of influence and make them Christian. Education, religion, family, business, government, military, arts, and the media. And they are working diligently to do just that. They use Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2 to support this view. And it says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of all of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it." And that's what will happen, they think, when this becomes a Christian nation. Now, I think it would be great if everybody's a Christian. If everybody's a Christian, it would solve a lot of our problems. But Christianity cannot be legislated. This happened in the early church as it moved and spread and became a government institution by the time of Constantine. Well, it took centuries, but by the time of Constantine, at least the persecution stopped. And something similar is happening now, but it won't take centuries this time around. And whenever Christianity is legislated, the result is injustice and persecution. Now, I developed this sermon with a couple of goals in mind. One is I wanted to pay tribute to our country. I think it's the greatest nation in history. And with all its faults, I mean, it has preserved liberty not only for us, but for much of the rest of the world. And I don't think it developed this way because we had great leaders. I think sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. Most of them were mediocre like everything else. I think that developed into what it is because the whole concept of liberty, freedom of worship, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. Now, these ideas are changing. And it might not be so much of a concern to us, except Revelation 13 plainly states that before this world ends, oppression will return. You can't read it without coming to that conclusion. It says in Revelation 13:15, "He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the beast to be killed." These chapters describe the final conflict between those who worship the beast and receive his mark and keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. And I would counsel you to don't wait until laws passed that control religion. For us, that may be too late. The parable of the 10 virgins applies here. The parable of the 10 virgins teaches us to keep our lamps alive, keep oil in our lamps. And you can't go through these times without and do that without doing it intentionally and seriously. You're not going to drift into it. If you want to be ready for this, you get yourself right to God with God right now. There may not be a future, and when it gets here, it might be too late. There should be, among God's people, a deepening of religious experience. In Counsels in Health it says, and all who do not grow stronger and become more firmly rooted and grounded in the truth will be gradually retrograding. You can't stand still. What you did 10 years ago, what you do now, who you are now is what's important. Bible study, prayer, involvement in religious meetings are needed to keep the soul alive. I encourage you to get involved in whatever church capacity you can. When we have meetings, come out. Your enthusiasm, your involvement is what makes them work. Do you hear me? I know you're all busy people, but you're not that busy. In other words, our pioneers, going back to those who paid for our freedom, they had to commit everything to this. And that's what it costs. And the biggest danger to us, I think, I'm going to read another statement, Fundamentals of Christian Education. A mind educated to feed on trash is unable to see in the Word of God the beauty that is there. Now, we got a lot of trash in our world today. And unfortunately, it is more available today than any other time in human history. You can't, I've been in groups of people that, 4 or 5 or maybe more people, and they're all in the same room, and they're all looking at these silly, these what do you call them, smartphones? I don't know how they got that name. Love for Jesus and inclination to righteousness is lost if the mind feeds on trash. For the mind is built up from that upon which it feeds. And this is one of the great temptations of our time. We have that. We carry it around in our pockets. It's with us all the time. It's too easy to turn into the internet activity, and the vast majority of it is degrading. And you all know what I'm talking about. The operators of this system have become so incredibly skillful at leading the mind from one step to the next. It's amazing. What are you doing about it? What are you going to do about it? If you knew Christ was coming in 2 weeks, what would you do? Well, I think we still have time. But I don't think we have a lot. And the question for each of us, what are we doing to deepen our religious experience? What is our commitment? What are we willing to sacrifice? You have time right now, but spend it wisely.